Hey everyone, Lauren from Wildflowers here today to show you how to use the guide stamping plate to create this beautiful one-stroke flower design on the nail. I'm going to begin by coating my nail with CND Shellac and Cityscape, and then I'm going to use the foil called Fifth Avenue from dollarnailart.com to coat the nail. So this is what the nail looks like before we begin. I'm going to finish off with a top coat and then buff it, and so here now we're ready for our stamp. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab the stamping plate, and this one right here in the middle on the right is the one we're going to use. And I'm just going to grab some white polish. This is from Orly. It's called White Tips, but it's just regular white polish. I'm going to go ahead and spread that on the design. Don't have to worry about covering it completely, just cover most of it. And then quickly I'm going to grab my scraper. I'm going to scrape the design, not pressing too hard, just enough. And then I'm going to come straight down within seconds with my stamper. And you can see it picked up the image perfectly. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab my nail and just look straight down through the stamping tool to see exactly where I want it. And I'll show you in just a second here. That's where I want it, so I'm going to go ahead and press and then lift off the design. And so we are ready. We have our guide down, and now we can use this with our one stroke, and we know exactly where to put everything. So I'm working on a wet palette, and I'm going to begin with my angled brush by loading the heel of the brush with the color Dahlia and the tip of the brush with white. And I'm just going to start making a short little stroke on my wet palette in one direction, and then I'm going to go ahead and flip my brush over to blend the other side. And I'm just going to try to continue to work in one spot on my palette. It seems to be the easiest thing to do. And when you make a rose, you want to start in the back. So I'm going to do these back two petals, and to be honest, these strokes really look like crap, but it's totally okay. It's nothing to get alarmed or upset about, and we're just going to go with it because it's still going to be a beautiful rose in the end. So don't stress out if your strokes aren't perfect. The great thing about doing the one stroke is that you can go over your strokes again if you're not happy with them. So I'm really not happy with these. I'm not happy with the ratio of dark to light. I'm not happy with the consistency, but it's okay. I'm going to show you what to do. You just re-blend your brush and just come right back over top of them. And so now these ones I'm pretty happy with. And it just really looks like two blobs, nothing too exciting yet. So I'm going to re-blend my paint. And when I'm blending my paint, I just sort of add where I feel I need it. And as you can see, I'm just picking up the tiniest little bit of paint on my brush because what you don't want to do is have big lumps of paint in your brush. I'm going to come back down again, and I'm going to do a stroke sort of to the right and another stroke to the left. And I'm barely even stroking. I'm like setting my brush down and just picking it up. So it's really not a lot of like flicking or twirling or turning. It's pretty simple to do these strokes. So there's the back of the rose, and yeah, again, it's really not exciting at this point, but we're going to come through the front and make our first row of front strokes, and it's going to completely change the entire way that this looks right now. So I've loaded my brush, and so I'm going to come around the front with these strokes. So moving from left to right. And as you can see, it's actually connecting and making sort of a bowl shape out of these petals. There's another one. I'm going to finish one right there just by touching. And it actually makes that petal look like it's opening up. And so now, even though the strokes looked really bad at the beginning, it's actually starting to resemble a rose. So again, I'm just going to reload my brush with paint, working in the same place on my wet palette. And I'm going to come in and we're going to fill in these side strokes over here, these petals right over here on the side. So I'm actually flipping my brush around to the side. It's very awkward feeling to work like this, but it's one of those things where you just kind of get used to it. Flipping back the other direction And you can see the bristles of my brush are barely even moving. I'm touching so lightly down on the surface of the nail. I'm going to reload again, adding a little bit of dark, that dahlia color. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start my stroke, and you'll watch the front white tip of the brush has to sort of swoop around just a bit. So I'm going to turn the nail. And I'm working so feather light. I'm not pushing or pressing. I'm just barely tickling the surface of that nail to get the paint off my brush. And so again, I'm coming in, and you'll see the bristles of the brush are not even moving. That's how light I'm stroking. And then I'm going to go back over these ones because I wasn't completely thrilled with the way they turned out. And now I like the way they're looking. And that's the beauty of one stroke, is it doesn't have to be just one stroke. You can actually go over your strokes again and again until you're really happy with the color blend. And that's usually why I'll choose to go over my stroke again, is if I'm not really happy with the color blend. So right here you can see I'm going to go over, and I'm actually going to highlight these even more with some even brighter color in there, because they're towards the front of the flower. So you want the bright white to be in that front part of the flower, and as you can see, it really makes it look three-dimensional when you do that. So just remember that when you're making something that you want to look like it's actually 3D or three-dimensional, the bright white color that you see, you want to be closest to your eyes. And in the background, you can see it's almost like a pink color, which is totally perfect. And so now we have our basic rose shape, but what I want to do is I need to fill in that sort of middle part that's just dark. You could leave it if you want to, but I would rather get some little petals in there. So I'm going to come in, and I call this the diva stroke, but it's commonly known as the comma stroke. So you set your brush down, and you almost just lift up on your brush so that only the white part is touching. So you set it down to begin, and then tip just to the white part and kind of swoop in. So now it looks like we actually have some petals filled in the center of our flower. Now I'm going to go ahead and start on the leaves. I mixed the color Fern with a little bit of white, the butter paints, and I'm just going to put a tiny bit of the marigold color also. And for the leaves, there's so many different ways. I would recommend that you kind of experiment and play around making leaves. I'm choosing to do the light color on the outside for these particular leaves. So I'm going to go ahead and just ever so gently come up. And then I'm going to kind of swoop back down. And again, if you're not really happy with it, you can go right back over top of it again. As long as you don't get bigger and bigger. When you start getting bigger and bigger, then you have issues. One of the cool things too about stamping your design on there first is if you really don't like it for some reason, you can take either water or alcohol and you can wipe the butter paints off, and your design will stay there because the design was made with polish. So if you really don't like it for some reason, you can always go back and just sort of wipe the butter paints right off there and sort of start over. So I'm just blending the paints, turning my nail as I need to, using the light color on the outside for these particular leaves. You can wiggle to make the leaves look kind of jaggedy, or you can just do them smooth. I just chose to do them smooth on this one. I'm not really too concerned with the way the leaves look, just because I know the rose is actually the center point of the composition. So I'm not really thrilled with this leaf, so I'm going to go back and see if I can make the tip of it a little pointy because it looks kind of goofy right now. So I'm just blending my colors together. And again, if you notice my brush, like the color is barely even halfway up on my brush. So there should be no gunked up paint on the brush. This should all be like very controlled, very light, just loading my brush with just enough paint to get me through my stroke. It's really important to work neat when you're doing one stroke, because if you start getting sloppy, then the color gradation in your brush is going to be really sloppy and it's just going to turn into a big mess. You're not going to have the blend where it's blending from, white to green in your brush. It's just going to look like a light green color, and then you're not going to get any type of three-dimensional effect when you're doing one stroke. So it's important to work neat. It's important to work controlled and to work on a palette that's also neat. And so I'm just using this guide that we stamped on, and I'm just filling in these leaves. Again, I'm keeping my light color out for these particular leaves, and it's pretty easy. Once you get going and once you have a good color blend in your brush, it's pretty quick. Now this little part up here didn't stick very well when I stamped it, and it's kind of in the way, but the whole purpose of this stamp is to serve as a guide. So we know where we want this leaf to go, so I'm just gonna grab this little piece off here because it's in my way. And I'm gonna go ahead and use my brush and just pull down some leaf strokes. So that's pretty much it for the leaves. Now I'm going to go over these white lines. So I'm going to use art paints in pitch, and the art paints are really thin viscosity. The butter paints are thick viscosity. So I'm going to just add a little bit of the fern color butter paints to my pitch, just to adjust my color a little to a really dark green. And then I'm going to use my mini brush, and I'm just going to kind of outline along some of these lines. One of my favorite tricks when using the mini brush is after you load it with paint, you want to kind of roll the tip of it on your palette before you go to paint. That way you can get those really fine little hair thin lines that we're sometimes trying to get. And it's all about pressure. If you push down on the brush and then lift off, you're going to get a thick and then a thin line. So it's just a matter of practicing with your brush. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to use the art paints and powder, and I'm going to make some like itty bitty little tiny dots in the center of the rose that are going to look like pollen. So I'm going to mix a little bit of my really thin viscosity powder art paints, which is the white, with just a touch of that marigold butter paint. And I rolled it to a point, and as you can see, I can get dots so little, they're almost as tiny as, the point of a needle. And so that's it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my art paints, and I'm just going to highlight some of the petals. Again, where you want to see that bright white is the stuff that's closest to you. So you wouldn't want to do this really around the back of the flower. You want to stay on the tips of the petals that are coming towards you in a three-dimensional sense. Now that I'm all set with my design, I'm going to go ahead and apply a generous amount of top coat. Make sure I get all of the butter paints and the art paints completely encapsulated all the way around the edges, and we're ready to cure. Now looking at this design, I feel like it's a little naked up in the corner and down on the bottom, so I'm going to use this lace design on the design stamping plate. I'm using a stamping polish, so I'm going to go ahead and load it up really well. And then I'm going to scrape. I'm not pushing really hard when I scrape. And then I'm pressing my stamper down, and as you can see, we picked up the image perfectly. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to use the clear stamper and line it up so that it ends right in the proper place. And I'm doing this right into the tacky layer, so it's a little slimy and it moves a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and just press that, and it's going to come right off. Add one more little bit, which is the best part of the clear stamper. You can see exactly where you're stamping. And so here it is. I'm going to pop it in the light for 10 seconds. And then I'm going to top coat and cure one more time. And so here's our finished nail. I hope you guys learned something today. All the products, the stampers, stamping plates, everything's available at wildflowersnails.com.